in who is planning to come in, and if they are not here yet, they will come eventually. Kylie, are you recording this? Oh, I can't hear you, Kylie. You're muted.
I am. Derek asked me to. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, no, that's perfect.
Okay, great.
I would just like to ask everyone to please make sure that they have muted their microphones so that your sound doesn't interfere with the panel discussion today. So let's begin. My name is Rachel Klipa, and I'm very honored to have been invited to moderate this panel between artist Derek Reese, artist and assistant professor Kylie Ford, and executive director of the Associated Artists of Pittsburgh, Madeline Gent. Today's panel will be divided into 3 parts. During part 1, we will hear from Derek and Kylie about the exhibition Masculine Artifacts, their art practices, and their connection to West Virginia. In part 2, we'll talk with Madeline about the Associated Artists of Pittsburgh and their supportive role in Derek's work, in addition to the support of their members, because both Derek and Kylie are members of Associated Artists of Pittsburgh, or AAP, which you will hear me use that acronym as well. And finally, in part 3, we will open it up to the audience for questions. And I want to add here too that even though we're saving questions until the end, if you feel that your question is pertinent to the topic at hand in that moment, please feel free to jump in. Kylie, is there a raised hand function in this application, in this platform?
There should be. Well, that looks like a thumbs up. Okay. There are gestures, and I would also encourage those interested in Joel's using them right now. I'm also would encourage those interested in asking a question. I have the chat function up on my end, so I'm more than happy to review the chat and review any questions at the conclusion of the discussion.
That would be great, Kylie. Thank you. And I want to let everyone know too that I will be transitioning from sharing my screen, not sharing my screen, as we go through this discussion. And as always, thank you all for being here. We appreciate your attendance. So I'm going to get started. And this first question is for Derek. So the miner and the miner stripped of his clothes, parts 1 and 2, were commissioned as part of the 2021 Saco Art Biennale in Antofagasta, Chile. Although the film is specifically about West Virginia, there are connecting themes between West Virginia and Antofagasta, namely the subject of mining and the effects of the mining industry on communities and the environment. Can you talk about the process in regard to how you honed in on the subject of mining and how you conceptualized the miner and the miner stripped of his clothes? And before you start, I want to share my screen so everyone can see the work as it looks in the gallery. So give me 1 second as I do this. Can we see my screen?
Your WebEx, yep.
Yep, okay. Let me bring this up to slideshow. And I turn it over to you, Derek.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. And thanks to Kylie and Fairmont State for putting this together. I think this started as a conversation at 123 with Jeff Heindel after maybe too many beers, talking about where I might be able to show this work after it left Chile. So I'm really grateful for Fairmont State for hosting it. Yeah, so coal mining. You know, my work has always been informed by my upbringing in West Virginia. I come from a long line of coal miners. My grandpa was killed in the mines in the 1950s, and my dad was a coal miner as well. So it's impossible, you know, for my work not to be informed by coal mining to some degree, by coal mining and coal miners. In the past, I would say my work has not necessarily referenced mining explicitly, but I think what drove me to take this leap into filmmaking and referencing coal mining so explicitly was the passing of my father last February, and just sort of reflecting on his life, finding a way to honor him and find some order and meaning in a time right now that feels pretty chaotic and arbitrary. So that's really the sort of nugget of inspiration that the film came from. If you go back a little bit further, the organizers of the Sacco Biennial that you mentioned, Rachel, they were interested in the work that I was making sculpturally. I'm primarily a sculptor. And originally the intent was I was invited to go down in April of 2020 to do about a month's worth of research on the copper mining industry down there in Chile. And they have a region in Chile, in northern Chile, called the Antofagasta region. It's in the desert there. I can't remember the name of the desert right now. But I started to imagine the parallels between the Antofagasta region and the Appalachian region, both being these sort of like leaders in the export of these minerals. Like, so Appalachia, you have coal, of course, and in Antofagasta in Chile, you have copper. They're actually the world's leading producer of copper. And in Appalachia, coal was once obviously king, and now is sort of a dying industry to a certain degree. But so the goal was to go there and explore the copper mining region and sort of see if I could draw parallels between Antofagasta and Appalachia. And I was going to do research for a month, and then I was going to come back to Pittsburgh and then go back in September of 2021 to actually create the artwork and exhibit it for the biennial, which happens in which happened in October of 2021. COVID completely blew those plans out of the water, and I was completely unable to go to Chile at all. So instead of just not going and saying thank you so much, maybe some other time, I negotiated with them to make a film instead, something that I could just email them digitally, essentially. And so that's really where the film really came out of necessity as much as it did creativity. And so so that's where we're at right now. Luckily they agreed. I didn't have an idea necessarily cinched up before I proposed the plan, but they went for it, and so here we are.
Well, Derek, the film is really beautiful, and one question that I did want to throw in listening to you is, since you couldn't go there, how did you connect the community there and find those parallels between the mining industries, and what were they, if you could think of a few?
Yeah, I mean, they were I still like to think that I did a virtual residency of sorts. I mean, I had a lot of conversations with gallery directors and artists and political activists in Chile. So even though I physically couldn't be there, I could still communicate over Zoom or whatever. So I was still able to collect anecdotally, stories about people's experience there, and just so many amazing stories, and learning as much as possible about not so much the mining industry, but more the culture in Antofagasta in the shadow of the copper mining industry. That's really where my interests lied, and so it was really interesting to hear all the stories about that sort of had to do with mining, but weren't really directly related, like the sex industry, and then Antofagasta, because of all the migrant miners who come in to work, and just all these different really interesting stories. Tragic, a lot of them pretty tragic. So so there was sort of a virtual residency that took place, and I feverishly was trying to learn Spanish so I could have conversations, and of course you helped a lot with the translation, which was really great. So that was kind of my experience in terms of my residency. That wasn't ultimately.
No, that's awesome. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second and come to my next question, which Derek sort of touched upon, which is that, Derek, your practice is heavily focused on materiality, sculptures, and assemblages or assemblages. Why did you feel that a short film was the best medium for this commission? Because this is something new for you. I mean, yes, it was practical in terms of what happened. You couldn't go to Chile, but I feel that this is also new for you as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's been like 30 years in the making, I feel like. You know, film has always been an inspiration to me, popular film in particular. I have an older brother who's 7 years older than me, so I was introduced to all the good stuff pretty early. So, you know, Harmony Korine movies and like Gummo and all the stuff that I shouldn't have been watching, Natural Born Killers and Pulp Fiction and all this violent sort of like toxic masculinity and sort of but with like bright colors and the sort of sexy, sort of sleek overtones, right? Like those were perfect for like a 13-year-old kid, right? And so yeah, I think that like had I not I think if film would have been more accessible to me at that age, I might have been doing that rather than visual arts. I think visual arts was more accessible. My aunt was a visual artist and a teacher, and so it was sort of like accessible, and it was like right there waiting for me to a certain degree. But gosh, like I really loved film and filmmaking. The idea of filmmaking, I didn't do it that often. When I was little, we used to like make movies and stuff, and I was really inspired by like the movie Clerks. You know, this idea of like, oh my God, the ability, like it was so accessible, right? Like you could just make this movie on like security cameras or whatever, you know. And I can remember my older brother bringing home this like video recorder from like a pawn shop or something, and we tried to make a movie. It lasted like a couple of days, but so yeah, it's been in the works for a long time, and I think, you know, because I couldn't travel to Chile, I just craved a jolt life, and I wanted to really challenge myself to do something that I've been meaning to do and haven't done. And what better time? I mean, like the world is in a pandemic, like there's like an undemocratic political coup unfolding on television, right? Like the Western United States was on fire at the time. It was just like, what are we doing? Like, I want to do something different and take some chances. And there's nothing more exhilarating than like committing to something that you're not sure is going to work. But I think it worked out.
I do too, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think it fits with your themes and looking at your own life, reflection, culture. I think it worked out very well. And Kylie, this next question is for you. As an assistant professor and curator for the gallery, what inspired you to organize a solo exhibition of Derek's work?
Yeah, well, Derek already started by giving us a little bit of a background at 1, 2, 3. But ultimately, when it came to me, we were sitting actually in an art department meeting, kind of talking about kind of shifts in responsibilities and things of that nature. And I happily took on the gallery director responsibilities. And my fellow colleague, Jeff Heindel, mentioned Derek as a possible candidate. So I have been previously familiar with Derek and know his networks with the Fairmont State community. He used to be an adjunct professor, and he was actually an adjunct professor and a juror for a student exhibition when I was a student there. I won't tell how many years ago, but some time ago.
Oh my God, Kylie! I just realized.
What?
Was yours the hacky sack sculpture?
Yeah, that was me.
I remember that now. That was like 10. That was 10 years ago. I just remember.
That was over 10 years ago. Okay, Derek said it, not me.
Right.
But
I didn't mean to derail you.
You're okay. No, go ahead. I'm totally in for conversation. So anyway, I was thinking about Derek's previous relationships with Fairmont State. I was thinking about his regional beginnings as an artist in West Virginia, and I was really excited to be able to show that to students. So I thought his work specifically would show an interesting example of how students can use their cultural and geographic backgrounds as influence within their practice. And many of our students reside regionally. So many of our students are either mostly from West Virginia, if not the greater West Virginia area. So I thought that Derek's work would give them subject matter that they could relate to. So I think his exhibition was a great example of how students can identify and translate common themes of their experiences within their creative work. So I'm thinking of the J.D. Brooks Gallery specifically as a sort of enrichment gallery. It is utilized within our department curricula as a way to strengthen our students' creative practice and give them examples of how practicing artists pursue their creative work. So I wanted to invite Derek as a way to give them this sort of blueprint of how they can translate identifiable matters to them within their creative practice. And I also thought, especially starting early in creative endeavors, we're thinking about things like, what do we do with our art degree? So I think giving them a West Virginia native artist who's also still working in the greater Appalachia area is a way to show them the possibilities of being able to sustain a creative practice. So.
No, I think that's great. And we could say the same for you as well, in making identifiable themes for your students and for the students at Fairmont State. So as an artist yourself, your practice, much like Derek, centers on materiality. And for me, from my perspective, your materials metaphorically represent the complexities and layers of place. Mm-hmm. And in part of your artist statement for the work Passing Through, which I thought was really beautiful.
Thank you.
You wrote, and I'm paraphrasing this, that West Virginia is beautiful, peaceful, and sometimes neglected. It's rich and not so rich. There is wear and tear of lost industries, of lost labor, and sometimes lost hope. The natural and man-made landscapes exist in both subtle and apparent ways. This place is tired and something feels heavy. There is a quiet, asphyxiating beauty and solemn calmness. And using the work Passing Through as an example, which I'm going to pull up in a second before Kylie answers, what is your artistic approach for encapsulating and visually manifesting the totality that you see as West Virginia? Because I feel that you're trying to reconcile many things in your work. So let me bring up my shared screen here so you can see this. Back to slideshow, and we're going to move on to Kylie's work. And I'll probably just scroll slowly through some of these images as she talks. So go ahead, Kylie.
Yeah. So my first step, I'll talk a little bit about just kind of general, and then I'll talk about Passing Through specifically. This is an exhibition I had at the Sculpture Center in Cleveland, Ohio last time is blurring together. I believe May. It closed in June or July. So my first steps essentially is just trying to figure out how I feel when I'm existing in a specific space. So I reflect on how do I feel as I'm navigating through my daily routines? What are things that are identifiable within my experiences in my geographic area? And I'm just thinking about kind of the emotional condition of existing as a human within Appalachia, and in some instances as a female in Appalachia as well. And then as I'm starting to kind of identify these feelings and these sorts of emotional sensations, I think about the metaphors and the places that I can associate with these feelings. So when I'm thinking about Passing Through specifically, I became, and I still am, my fixations last for years. I guess sometimes, I guess that's why artists like teeter on this borderline of like insanity, right? There's these things that you can't, you have to figure out. But I became quite fascinated on the foggy mountainous landscape of West Virginia. It was something I especially started noticing more deeply when I moved back to West Virginia from Maine. Like Maine also has quite foggy seascapes and things, but it just feels different in West Virginia. The way these mountainous kind of landscapes just loom over you in this really monumental, quiet way. It feels like entrapment, but it feels like home, and it feels like peace, and it feels like time stopping in this unique area. So it typically happens. I usually see this on rainy days. I hear it happens on sunsets, but I'm going to be honest, as a late worker, I rarely see a sunrise. I'm sorry, not sunset. Plenty of sunsets, not a whole lot of sunrises. And so I started noticing this sort of formal gradient in the landscape and the monumental scale of the looming mountains, and something just indicated the region for me. This kind of feeling like you're sifting through water, but at the same time, it's a quiet pause and this peaceful sensation. And that's why I started negotiating and thinking about what does quiet look like, and negotiating visually this relationship between solemn and stately. And I thought it summed up, and I'll talk some more about like some cultural sort of contradictory feelings that I feel like kind of hold us West Virginians together and provide this common thread with us. But anyway, I was thinking about this kind of intuitive feeling of these mountains, these foggy, dark, glooming, quiet mountains, as feeling like home. So in terms of materiality, I use OSB frequently, which is what these shingles are made out of. It's commonly used, it's a common material used in industrial purposes, and I see it as a support system. It's something that's supposed to be, it's necessary but not supposed to be seen, which is very much what I think of kind of West Virginia's relationship with the natural resource industry. It's this thing that's fueling the country, but it's in the backyard and kind of not really necessarily seen, right? So I see OSB as a sort of workhorse for an architectural structure. It's the necessary materials that are used to support and not to be seen. I think it's also a common material that's used to board up windows and signal abandonment. So it shows something that's transitioning through time and through use. So I ended up, for this particular piece, I think I created about 1,200 decorative shingles, or I guess I say shingles, they're not, out of OSB. So I'm making this kind of humble material scene. And I've formed it into a gradient landscape. So the floor pieces that were previously in the previous landscape, I was reflecting on the dissolving nature of a house foundation. So especially as I'm walking through woods, things of that nature, you see the residue of the structures and these sort of dissolving brick foundations. So I was relating those notions of brick, relating them back to the architecture of the space, and this notion of a semi-opaque, ominous landscape. So I've been interested in architecture for quite some time. I'm interested in how it personifies inhabitants, but how it also personifies an area. And when I'm thinking about Derek's work specifically, in the way that I'm kind of personifying architecture and I'm using these sort of non-human metaphors, I'm starting to see that sort of reflection in his characters and things as well, in the ways that these kind of personify these larger entities. Or that's how I'm kind of reading the characters as used within his work as well. So that's that, yeah.
Wow, thank you, Kylie.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to come back to Derek. So Derek is, what was interesting to me is that when I was reading Kylie's statement on passing through, or for passing through, and listening to her now, I feel and felt as if in some ways her description of West Virginia fits your film, especially in another part of her statement, which I didn't include, but Kylie wrote about navigating the contradictions of West Virginia, which she just mentioned, in both private and public spaces. And Derek, in your film, I feel as if we're looking at the public and private personas of a miner. So in part one of the miner and the miner stripped of his clothes, for me, there is a sense of anxiety. He looks tense, possibly ruminating, and has these sort of physical outbursts where he suddenly hits the wall, turning and hitting the wall. And the miner, to me, seems really stuck in this visual space. And even though he could move a little bit, he can't seem to move out of it. So I wanted to ask you, what is the mental state of this immobile human being? And does it comment on the life of a coal miner? And before you answer, I just want to bring up a still from the film. Okay. All you, Derek, when you're ready.
Oh, sorry. For some reason I thought you were going to play a short film.
That'll be the last one.
I kind of. Well, thanks, Rachel. I think that I don't want to speak to what it means or is to be a coal miner. I'm not a coal miner, but I think that immobility and the state of being bound or stuck is a theme in my work for sure, and always has been. I use a lot of like things get bound with rope and tied, and bodies do, but also objects and material. And so, yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think there's like multiple ways in which being stuck or immobile sort of resonate with part one, which is, if for those that aren't familiar, so part one in the gallery space was played alongside part two, which is the actual short narrative film. But so I'm thinking about a few different things. So like there's the immobility associated with employment options, which is a common issue in Appalachia. I mean, it's a common issue everywhere. But that idea of like being stuck with few options and what to do with your professional life, right? And so then there's the immobility associated with just having to work. Like when I was little, like my biggest, one of my first like really like profound, not profound, like I was smart, but like big thoughts, right? And I had anxiety around it, was like the realization that like when I got older, I had to work. I had to work like 8 hours a day for 60 years, right? And then like that notion of like, oh my God, we like have to work as like adults. And like I would see my dad work, right? And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to work. And now I sort of don't, right? Because I'm an artist. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, so there's like that immobility, and like it's like impossible to avoid like having to work, right? So there's like that anxiety. And then if we're thinking about like miners, like there's the immobility of the threat of poor health or injury or even death. Like my grandfather was killed in the mines, right? So mining accidents, black lung, like these are all examples of this. But just in general, there's a toll to the body in mining, even if you're not injured or have black lung. And then more personally, like from like my dad's point of view, like there's the immobilizing pressure of toxic masculinity and having to act a certain way to fit in, which was something that my dad dealt with a lot, particularly in the mines. I think other men probably saw him as not like presenting like masculine norms of that culture, and he was given a hard time about it, and his life was made pretty difficult for a long time. So yeah, there's like all kinds of different ways that we're immobilized and bound, and so those are some of the things that I'm talking about here in this film.
Well, I think that you could definitely feel that, and I'm going to stop sharing. And I think that some of the things that you're drawing out, especially about the working class in particular, leads me into my next question for you, which is when I watched part two again, I was really struck by the inhumanity of the ending, which we're going to watch. The miner we see for nearly the entire film is exhausted and is clearly coming to some sort of end. When he digs himself up and disappears, this new miner emerges from the ground and instinctively puts on the coal mining gear. The new miner, with a look of determination, heads toward the same path that left the original miner lost and tired. So there is a feeling of almost inescapable cyclical behavior in the sense that laborers are dispensable. And my question to you, Derek, is do you feel that laborers like coal miners are seen as dispensable? And I want everyone to keep that question in mind, because I will now play the last few minutes of Derek's film. So you can see this. And again, this is my interpretation, but
this is a roller coaster, Rachel.
It's a roller coaster, and we're going to let everybody get on it too. So let me share my screen and bring the video up. And someone else might have some other opinions on this as well, which is exciting. So we could all see my screen. I'm going to load, I'm going to play it and then move it to where I want to move it. So this is right about at the point that I'm talking about. So that's where I'm going to stop it. And Derek, I'm going to bring the question back to you.
So the question was, are laborers indispensable or dispensable?
Are they dispensable? I sort of get that feeling when I watch this part again. And do you feel that laborers, like coal miners or even the working class in general, are seen as dispensable figures?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think in order for like our current system of capitalism to work, dehumanization is essential. So I did want that to come through in the film. And I think that my grandfather and father were part of that dehumanization, and I hold a lot of anger about that. So I hope that this film humanizes to a certain degree, but I also realize it's like really not a happy film. It doesn't have a happy ending, and it's meant to be sort of oppressive and intense to a certain degree, and so maybe part 3 will be happier. But it was only 12 minutes, so that's okay.
Well, I think that feeling of the dehumanization of the laborer is definitely coming through at the end.
So, and you know, it's funny, Rachel, like this is so important, these discussions, because I don't know if I knew that consciously necessarily. I think people have the expectation that artists know exactly what they're making, right? And know how to talk about it before they even make it, right? And like, but I think what people get confused about is that like art making is a process, and a lot of times that language and those ideas and like the crystallization of thoughts don't come until after you've shared it, right? And had the opportunity to talk about it and digest these things. And so this opportunity has been really cool because I got to sort of digest things a little bit.
Right, and learn how to, or not learn, but think about how you want to talk about these things that are coming from you as an artist, but also from a very personal place, and that's not easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I have some questions for Derek and Kylie, which is that, from my perspective, that both of you seek to understand how individuals are impacted by their environments through your work, particularly people in West Virginia. How do you think people in West Virginia are being impacted, and what would you like to see change? And we can start with Derek here.
No, let's start with Kylie.
Oh, let's start with Kylie. Okay, Kylie.
Either way, I'm totally cool with anything because I'm still mentioning Derek's work. He's like, I don't want to hide in this corner. So anyway, I was reading Derek's artist statement, and it was just furthered in your conversation now. But in the statement, Masculine Artifacts, you talked about West Virginians being exploited to a certain extent, and we're thinking about like the capitalist system. And I very much agree with that because I think it's mainly through the natural resource industry, the coal industry, and now the natural gas industry, where people really are kind of exploited to different extents for this really like valuable resource. So I feel like that sort of exploitation is driving tendencies for social insularity, especially in a lot of the rural regions, and it makes people more reluctant. In some instances, I'm talking as like a broad whole, I don't want to like reinforce the stereotype, but in some instances, I do feel that this might be an indicator or reason that there's some that are hesitant to release these more traditional ways of thinking, which in ways, like I understand in some instances, if you feel like you're being judged, you don't feel safe to move in and accept new ideas. So that's something I'd like to see changed. I'd like to see some of the negative stereotypes change of the region, and I would like to see kind of the rich resourcefulness start to come. But I'd like to see a more shift towards traditional modes of thinking and making so that those that are traditionally have been considered marginalized communities can come and thrive and further this sort of appreciation of place and humble, honest labor.
Thanks, Kyle. Go ahead, Derek.
I think that to piggyback off of that, I mean, I would love to see like Appalachians create industry that's by them and for them, right? Rather than their labor being sort of exploited by outside interests and coal companies. And not that that's, I mean, coal isn't the only thing in West Virginia. I know that, but that's kind of what we're talking about today. But I think that goes across the board for any type of industry or sector of work, right? Like you want and hope that that sector of work is by and for the people that live here. So that would be nice.
It would be. And my last question for Derek and Kylie for this first part is that it's clear that both of you look to West Virginia in terms of reflection and for answers to artistic and personal questions. In a state where inhabitants share a collective identity, what does it mean to each of you to be West Virginian?
So I'll push back one more time, Rachel, only because I make this mistake too. I think that the assumption that we all shared a collective identity is misleading. I think that, and I've talked about what I probably still do talk about West Virginia that way, but I think it's important to remember the different communities in West Virginia and the multicultural reality of West Virginia. But I think back to the question, I think improvisation. I think about my grandma, so I think a lot about like improvisation, humor, and grit. Those are like the three things that really I try to like take with me and feel like are inherited.
My turn.
Yeah.
I didn't want to make sure I didn't cut off Derek. After hearing him speak, though, I'm not really piggyback. This one, I really enjoyed this question. And the first thing, I wanted to kind of give you my knee-jerk reaction. What does it mean to be West Virginian? And I feel like it means to be humble. But then grit is like that, that when I heard Derek say that, it was a really identifiable sort of term that I also enjoyed and seems very crucial. And resourcefulness, for sure. So I put kind of in my notes that I think it means to be humble. I think there's also this kind of solidarity between West Virginians, knowing that we have our roots in an area that's pretty fairly misunderstood, I believe. So it seems like there can be this kind of conflicting when I talk to other artists and individuals from West Virginia. We have this similar kind of conflicting feeling of love and loss, where we have roots in this home. There's something that resides in us, but similar to what Derek had mentioned earlier, there's something not necessarily the industry here to support our home. So.
Wow. Thank you for those answers. Those were really beautiful. At this time, we're going to bring Madeline into the conversation. We're going to make a little bit of a shift here. That the Associated Artists of Pittsburgh have played a role in this project. And Madeline, for you, as the executive director of AAP, AAP is considering to fiscally sponsor artists in the future, since this is something that AAP doesn't currently offer. So to do a trial run of artist fiscal sponsorship, you decided to fiscally sponsor Derek's project. What was it about this project that convinced you it was a good candidate for the fiscal sponsorship program? And maybe share a little bit with us about AAP as well, Madeline.
Yes, thanks to Rachel. And I've enjoyed this conversation so far. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Kylie. As Rachel said, I am the executive director over the Associated Artists of Pittsburgh. We are an artist membership organization, a 501c that has been in Pittsburgh. This is our 112th year. So we have a long history, predominantly in exhibitions. That's kind of our bread and butter, kind of what we've always done. Putting art up, making it seen, getting curators, getting buyers, having those types of conversations. And what became clear in the pandemic was that we couldn't do that in the same way, but also that truly supporting the whole artist practice. So we had kind of dabbled in a few conversations here and there with the board, with my board and with staff, but we had never ventured so far as to actually do it, right? And so we had this kind of time to think through it, and at the same time we're talking about it, Derek approaches with this, I mean, in my mind, and I'm still very proud of Derek, this incredible opportunity to represent the United States abroad. Like, that's crazy. And we talk about a collective identity, like of within a state, I mean, within a country. And we're sending Derek as our ambassador. And I was like, I can't pass this up. Like, this is kind of perfect. And obviously it ended up changing and whatnot, but it just, working with someone like Derek, who has a background in arts administration, and with the Office of Public Art and his work there, that understanding like kind of how to navigate that project management side as much as that artistic practice side was incredibly important. Because so often, we talk about these ideas and artists just think, all right, you're just going to hand over that check to me and I can spend it as well. And it's like, no, we have to make sure we're doing this correctly and keep our receipts and track everything and understand and justify all this stuff and have conversations around this or that side of things. And Derek was up for it. He was up for, a half an hour meeting with our accountant, or a 45-minute, like me sitting there going through things with a fine-tooth comb with him. Like, and then when the project changed, like brainstorming how we can present that to the funders and having that language and that conversation with the foundation was, I think crucial to its success. They wanted to see Derek thrive, and so did I, and I think he did. I think the videos are incredibly interesting. In Pittsburgh in and of itself, the fiscal sponsorship conversation came up around, now we have Pittsburgh Center for Arts and Media, but was once a much larger organization that was Pittsburgh Center for the Arts and Pittsburgh Filmmakers, and a lot of artists get fiscally sponsored through them. And they might still be taking on some of those aspects of those projects, but not as much anymore. And so, conversations around fiscal sponsorship, how can we get more money directly to artists to support them, to support their work, not just financially, but also administratively. I think the work that Office of Public Art does, and you see it more and more so happening with the Creative Development Awards. I think there is this turn to it, to centering that practice. So it just happens that our timing aligned.
It really did. And I mean, Madeline, you've already sort of touched upon this, but how does the work of AAP maybe overall provide support to artists, and what do you hope to accomplish with the fiscal sponsorship? I mean, you kind of already touched upon that, but if there's something else you want to add here.
Yeah, I mean, for so long, like, AAP was a mile marker for so many artists to get into the museum. Like, it was like, I want to get into AAP so I can show at the Carnegie Museum of Art. I want to get into AAP so I will have my work, at the Warhol or at the Westmoreland. And that museum became some sort of milestone benchmarker of critical success or creative success, which, don't get me wrong, I still think that's important. I do think putting our artists in these cultural institutions is incredibly important, but I also think there has to be something more there. And so that's kind of where this, something like a fiscal sponsorship route will come in, or we do professional development workshops, or even with our own space, it is a lot of artist-driven programming that our members are submitting ideas and pushing that forward. We have an education program that we manage. So it's a larger conversation around what it means to be an artist, specifically an artist that works in or calls Pittsburgh and the surrounding region home.
Awesome. And Derek and Kylie, since both of you are AAP members, what has your experience been as being part of this organization as artists?
Kylie, do you want to go first? You want me to go?
Sure, I can start. Let's see. I think I'm coming into my third year as a member of AAP. So Derek, you might be probably around a little bit longer than me. But I'll talk a little bit I would still consider myself kind of in the emerging artist territory. So for me, especially relocating back to the area after getting my graduate studies in Maine at Maine College of Art and Design, I found AAP as an awesome way to network other artists or find like-minded thinkers and makers that I can identify with, and also to come back and taking on the gallery director position at the J.D. Brooks Gallery. The first thing I thought of was, wow, I have this data bank of artists readily available that I can reach out to now because of AAP. I also just love the theme of helping artists sustain a creative practice. So how do you develop networks outside of academia? And I saw AAP as that. And also I found the posting for my show at the Sculpture Center through an AAP opportunities ad. So slam dunk on that one. So
yeah, I mean, for me, we talked a little bit about my arts administration life. Like, I don't have a lot of extra time to I kind of I've chosen a weird path, right, where I have these two lanes where I'm an artist, but I'm also an arts administrator. So what I love about AAP are just the opportunities to exhibit in Pittsburgh, and I don't have to do a lot of the legwork and searching venues out, right? I get them in my email, and Dawn will be like, yo, submit some work for this, and I'll be like, okay. And so they make it really convenient and straightforward to sort of get some work out there, which is really nice. Almost to the point where it's there's just too many. I can't apply I'm not applying for this one. Sorry, so that's been really great. And then obviously the fiscal sponsorship was game changing for me. So did we give a background about the grant and stuff? So I got this opportunity, to go to Chile. And so I asked the Heinz Foundation for some money to support that. and they agreed, but I needed a fiscal sponsor. So that's kind of how that happened with AAP. I don't know if we talked about that. That's just for like students or whoever who might not be familiar with how that process works. So yeah, so that's been really great, and just like getting to know Madeline and working with Madeline, it's been awesome, and they're just a great organization.
I mean, like I said, like you're seeing more of that happening of getting, support to artists through other nonprofits. In part, like, you don't want to pay taxes on that huge gift. There's a really practical element to supporting the artist in that way. Like, we just gave that check straight to you. You'd be responsible for paying Uncle Sam his portion. Whereas opposed to, when a nonprofit gets involved, that kind of changes that and enables more of that money to be used to support your practice. Like, there was like a few moments with Derek where I'd be like, Derek, like, your artist stipend could be a little bit higher. Like, you're doing all of this work. Because so often with artists, it's just that, like, we think of the money that's just involved in that final project, whether that's on the wall or the video itself or this or that. But all of that research to get there, all of that time that you're thinking about it, all of those conversations you're having with your colleagues, with fellow artists, like all of that work, like if it was a lawyer, they would get paid for all of that, right? Like they'd be like, I'm billing the client for this time. Like they have no problem. For some reason, artists, there's that hesitation. So it was interesting on my end to like have those sorts of conversations about that and being like, all right, like keep your Dollar General receipts. Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun.
My favorite store.
Well, I have one more question.
Capitalism.
Oh. Well, I have one more question for Madeline. We're at 12:56, so maybe if everybody's okay with hanging out until 1:10 to let the audience ask questions if they have them. And also, Derek and I, we put some links in the chat, so make sure to check out the links that we're sharing. My last question for you, Madeline, is, as we already know, Kylie isn't based in Pittsburgh, but she is a member of AAP. So what are the geographic boundaries of AAP membership? What are the requirements for applying, and what makes a really good, strong application? And when's the next deadline?
So we just had our new member screening close on January 17th. So annually, we have an open application. So open December and it closed January 17th. And then we contract a juror, get a juror, I guess, to examine the artwork. So anyone who applied in December, that artwork is being considered. It's somewhere between 80 to 140 applications a year for membership. And there's no ideal number on our end, but really just kind of the juror looking at their creative practice. We do have a geographic radius of 150 miles. So either live or maintain a studio within 150 miles of Pittsburgh. And so that is one stipulation. Then over the age of 18, the legal adult age. But other than that, we really do work with whoever's eyes that we have kind of considering being the juror. And so right now, all of those artworks are in front of Tyler Shine, who's the new associate curator at the Warhol. So we're really happy to work with him on that project, and we hope to have those out soon. But we do one annual screening, but then we also open up some of our exhibitions that we have, and as an avenue to membership or a pathway to membership. It was interesting. I didn't realize, I wrote in the chat, Kylie, about the Sculpture Center show because we had been connected to Grace Chin through another member. And so all of a sudden, like, I'm like the biggest Sculpture Center fan and doing stuff with them over there. So that's really cool to hear that side of things. But like when Grace juried for us for an exhibition, it also was an opportunity for non-members to apply and receive membership that way. It's kind of the trials and tribulation of a membership organization and whatnot. But it's with that long history, we can say that, we've shown the work of Mary Cassatt, Henry Ossawa Tanner, Andy Warhol, Philip Pearlstein, Mel Bachner, Jonathan Borofsky, some like really heavy hitters, visual artists who have come out of Pittsburgh. That we can can kind of brush shoulders with and have a great history. But yeah, so the next official screening would be at the end of this year, at the end of 2022. But we still have this screening. All of the artwork is still under consideration. We just like to give the juror time to really examine it and look through it. But hopefully we'll get that news out soon.
Great. Well, Derek, Kylie, and Madeline, thank you so much for this awesome conversation. And now we're going to open it up to questions from those in the audience. I see that Sarah Esposito had a question. Sarah, do you want to start?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sarah. I went to undergrad at Fairmont, and I'm in grad school in Kent, Ohio right now. And I have some of these lovely people as my professors. I had the chance to know Derek the last couple years through online, and your work is incredible. And I just wanted to ask you about just like how you feel you're moving towards your film work that you were interested in, how you feel like solemn and sadness from those versus what feels like in your studio very like life-giving and like assemblage, and you feel very excited about those things, and moving forward, like how you feel like both of those like conscious thoughts are going to like appear in your work together or separately. And
Sarah,
oh, sorry.
you broke up a little bit. So like, what were the conflicting thoughts that I didn't hear?
I'm sorry. Did you not? Was that all gone?
Just bits and pieces. So were you asking like how I intend on sort of like merging like perhaps like the film stuff with like my sculptural?
Right. And like you talked on the like solo like sadness from these things, moving from what I feel like is very you know, gender fluid in a sense that's like very like has a lot of energy. And then also I listened to a Sheila Pepe artist talk in Akron, Ohio, and they were talking about how when they started making work that was more performance based, and how their installation and their sculptures like kind of had this conversation, and how what was really important at that time, and how your culture and that importance felt relevant like coming from the importance and the fragility of like the pandemic.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So yeah, I would say my sculptural and my other work before this film, like you're right, like it's sort of there's an element of like kitsch. It's certainly pretty colorful, and there's an element of humor for sure, and yeah, so the film is definitely different, right? And I think that as I get more comfortable with the medium, I think that I will be able to integrate better the two things. Like I've been having like a nervous breakdown trying to figure out like what am I doing in my studio now, because this film is so different, right? And it's a film. It's like a short film. Like what? So like, but I can't not talk about this film, this like white elephant in the room, right? That I made. So trying to figure out how to like marry, or like trying to figure out where those two paths merge, I think is going to be a tricky thing, and it hasn't happened yet, to be perfectly honest. I when I made this film, I started painting. Like that's how confused I am. Like I don't like
it can be confusing.
Yeah. So, but I did learn something from that painting, which is that I was like recreating some of the scenes from the film. But what I realized is like actually I might be more interested in like moving forward, like creating stage elements as sculptural elements that I then like perform in front of in film.
Yeah.
And so I think when that starts to happen, like we'll start to see like more playful, more ironic like imagery starting to happen again. I think that just like given the circumstances of where I was at and what was happening with my dad just passing away, and just like I was just in a state, right? And like we all were, and so that's just like where I was at the time.
Yeah, she like talked a lot about just like it's okay to make this work that it's different in the sense that it feels important now, and if it doesn't have to do anything with what you made in the past, it's what feels important and relevant and what has to happen. So I'm looking forward to.
Well, I appreciate you saying that because I need to hear that for sure. Because it feels like it
With
feels
this
like I've splintered, but that's not true.
Yeah. With this being my thesis semester, it's like all of those questions are being asked, so it feels like not a hard question for me to ask, but when I hear other people who have been in the game for a while and talking about being an artist at this point, it feels a lot less like a weight. So thank you.
Yeah, and it's good to see you. I do see you on Instagram a good bit. So
yeah, of course. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. So
awesome.
also thank you. Madeline, I have a question regarding AAP and how, like you said, the application was only a month span. And yeah, I just was really intrigued by this connection based, and because I don't know where I'm going to be at in the next year or so, but probably staying regionally. But it's always nice to hear those things. And I was saying, yeah, and also it like you know what? I'll have a better question to ask, but it was just good to hear about it because I think that Rachel asked most of those questions, and I think that you answered most of them. But if I have more questions, I will email you.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I didn't touch upon in Rachel's question is within the specifically Pittsburgh context is there's not a huge commercial gallery scene. In a lot of cities, you're seeing that. And so, what resources do artists have to show their work? So, wherever you do end up, being open to something beyond or like being open to looking beyond okay, this is Googling galleries. And if there's not a gallery, I know there's also places that call themselves galleries, like an eyeglass gallery. And you're like, that's not what I
I'm the assistant gallery director for Kent, so I'm like always looking at stuff like that and learning about things like that. So yeah, I just didn't know those kind of connections were made, even though I'm around such a like I taught last year, and now I'm in the gallery. So it was just like I didn't even know those kind of um it feels like some sort of representation of um artists, kind of like a gallery, but it feels like a lot more. So I don't know. It was nice to hear about it.
Yeah, no, it's good. And I mean, I saw Sally Ann on the call, and I know some of her wonderful staff members from Office of Public Art are here. But there's a lot of institutions that in this city that are trying to do more and more directly with artists. And I know OPA is one of them, specifically their work with the creative and stuff. Yeah.
I think my professor here now, Eli Kessler, was in Pittsburgh for a while and worked with people in the area, and I think he was telling me about this. So it's interesting that I was hearing about it now too.
Well, we do have another question. Thanks for that discussion. This is from Becky, and I'm going to read Becky's comment and ask the question. Hi, Derek. I don't doubt that the video is sad, but it would be sadder if you or the video did not encourage us to pause to begin to think about what it might feel like to be the dispensable labor. Though there is so much struggle and injustice and misconception in the past that we can't change, still in a way I feel there is hope under the idea of beginning the process of empathy, because that's the only way change can happen. I am overall left with a feeling of empathy, which is where hope begins, and a thankfulness for truth, rather than complete immobilized sadness at the end. My family lived in West Virginia when I was 1 to 2 years old. I don't remember anything from that time, but my parents talk a lot about the experience. So this kind of work helps me to imagine some of the culture that I don't remember. Here's a question. How sure were you about the video's content and imagery before you started shooting it? Did it change while you were shooting? Thank you, Becky. Derek?
Yeah, thank you, Becky. That was really nice to hear about hope and empathy for a change. Yeah, so I'm pretty proud of myself. I mean, I'm totally like, I work another example of like two different ways of making, right? Like, my sculptural work is very improvised and from the hip, and but the film was really like, I wrote it, I had a script, and like I did like site scouting with me and my brothers, like in my brother's pickup truck, and like I kind of knew exactly, like, this movie has been like ready to make. And so I wanted to make it on the site where my grandfather was killed, but I had a hard time accessing that property. But my older brother, lives right next to an abandoned strip mine. The landscape is just gorgeous. If you look, I mean, when I say gorgeous, I mean like brutal and like heartbreaking, but like aesthetically beautiful. And so I, aside from like initially wanting to do it where my grandfather was killed, like I knew that like that was the spot. It was just this epic like landscape with all these different types of topography, and yeah, so I wrote a script. Oh, and I was nervous earlier, like when I say I made this film, like it's important for me to mention that I had like a crew of people, right, that I was able to pay. And my wife was my assistant director. She's on the call right now. Trey Duplain was the cinematographer who did did all the photography work. Will Zavala did field sound recording. Ben Peters did like sound mixing for me, and both of my brothers were there helping, just like dig holes and do all kinds of things, get me water. Yeah, so like everything was planned out, and like, I mean, we definitely improvised a little bit, like shot to shot, and reshot things like, oh, wouldn't it be cooler, like might it be not better from like this angle, but like it was pretty planned out, which is totally not my MO. But I think in order, like, it only took us 2 days to film, so we were pretty efficient about it, and like we only had so much money too, right? So I'm looking forward to like, whereas like the part one, like the movement study stuff, that's all very like much improvised and like done on my cell phone. And so I imagine moving forward, as I continue to explore with film, like it'll be a little bit more, it'll probably be more like experimental, things like that. But yeah, thanks for the question.
I know we're a little bit over time, but we do have a really nice comment from Tanya that I would like to read. Derek, if you want to respond to this. And we just got a new question from JAC or Jack. So Tanya's comment first. This was an amazing discussion. I'm glad I could tune in for a bit. We've chatted about this before, Derek, but I wanted to reiterate how powerful this has been for me, particularly the last few minutes of the short film. As a lifelong West Virginian from a coal mining family who is an educator and a member of the union, those concluding moments spoke volumes to how I've felt these past 4 years. So thank you, and thank you for representing the struggle of laborers in West Virginia in such a way that transcends any ill-founded conception an outsider has of us.
Thank you, Tanya. That's really amazing for you to say. Thank you for being here.
The next question from Jack or JAC.
Kind of think who that might be.
I don't know. They're a little mysterious. It's okay. Beautiful work by both artists, both thought-provoking and quite haunting. Kylie, your work made me homesick for times long gone of walking in the woods and seeing forgotten structures. Derek, your work has the ability to make one feel blissfully uncomfortable. I cannot wait to see what's next. Dare I ask, what is next for you two? For both of you. What's next?
What's next, Kylie? Let's see. What's next for me?
And for me, answer that question too.
I have a couple like lifelong dreams. So I would like to like deconstruct a whole house and reassemble it in a sort of gradient. So Madeline, keep me in your brain. No, I'm kidding. But so I'm interested again in just trying to think more specifically about specific areas in West Virginia that have been kind of maybe more so exploited than others. I'm thinking about the opioid industry, things of that nature, and then finding ways to use the personified architecture to put it in places to reveal these sort of unseen struggles.
Yeah. Collaboration, Kylie?
Let's do it, Derek. Hey, we've already been doing some video stuff, huh?
That's true. Oh my gosh, yeah, and Kylie did some of the video work for part 1, which is like the movement pieces. She created well, you can tell people what you did, Kylie, but
yeah, we were playing with, because we were talking when this was first coming to fruition, what are the possibilities? And that's part of one of the energizing parts of working with other artists in a sort of gallery setting. Sometimes I get so enveloped in my own work and my students' work. It was really energizing working with Derek and thinking about possibilities and him being so open to them. So as soon as I started seeing the movement studies, I started thinking about Bruce Naumann's contrapposto pieces and this sort of multi-channel assemblage of a figurative work and its kind of art historical trajectory and the contrapposto, like that kind of invigorating, important time when figures started shifting their movement. So I was like, Derek, why don't we try to make these multi-channel? And he's like, let's do it. And we did it. We did it.
I'm very good at, like, if someone's excited to do something, just, yeah, do it. I don't care.
Yeah, let's try it.
Yeah.
We do have another question from Zara, if I'm saying your name correctly.
It's Sarah, but that's okay.
Oh, Sarah? Okay.
Yeah. I just want to say, as someone who grew up in, like, Wayne County, and I have been really immersed in, like, everyone is, like, a coal miner, I feel like this piece has been, like, really hard for me to, like, watch and want to watch it, because I have seen so many people from Wayne County be so affected by coal mines, like, closing, and, like, even though I haven't been affected by it, I've heard and, like, I've seen so many people who have been so affected by it that it's, like, hard to, like, put myself into that situation, because I have friends who have, like, are in, like, poverty now because their families don't have work anymore, and they've only been in coal mining families. And so I just, like, really want to thank you for putting this into light. And I just feel like people from all aspects who have been from coal mining families can just really relate to how hard it is to be in this community. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Zara. That was really, thank you for sharing that.
Derek, we have another question from Ruth, who's asking, how old were you when you started working as a child? And she says, I'm from China, so she's not sure about U.S. child labor. I mean, how old were you when you started working?
First of all, hi, Ruth. I got to work with Ruth through a mentorship program at WVU, and Ruth just graduated, and her paintings are amazing. Anyway, so when did I start working? Oh, yeah, so there are laws in the U.S. about when we're allowed to start working, Ruth. I think I was like 15 or 16 when I started, like, when I was officially part of the system and received a paper, like, check. But, you know, I mowed grass for my grandma and cleaned and did all kinds of stuff. So, you know, maybe 12. But yeah, I've always, like, up until like 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, like, I worked in, like, labor type jobs, cooking, and I like to kid that, like, I don't work anymore, but of course I do. But yeah, so I mean, I've always worked in kitchens and done, like, remedial labor type stuff, and to get through. So yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions before we conclude this discussion? You could either unmute yourself and speak, or something in the chat. I'll give everyone another minute to think. I think no one has any questions. Just a nice comment from Lois. Thanks, all very interesting. Proud to call you family, Derek.
Oh, thanks, Lois.
That's
my mother-in-law.
Was that your mother-in-law? That's awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. Derek, thank you for your work. Kylie, thank you for your work and for you being here and organizing. Madeline, thank you to you as well. And all of you for being here and asking wonderful questions and for your attention. We're all very grateful.
Rachel, thank you so much for putting this together. You did an awesome job.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much.
Sorry to bum everybody out. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Lovely to share our.
Thank you for much. Thank you, Kylie.
Yes, you're very welcome. I'll keep the meeting open for.
I like how we're just thanking everybody and everybody's gone.
No.
All right, bye, everybody.
Thanks, Kylie.
I just wanted to say, really, really, really great job.
Oh, thank you.
How do I leave this?
I mean, people could still. I mean, I'll stay here if people are going to tell me how good it is. All right, bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, we're good. Bye.